So yes, as previously mentioned, hello, my name is Baz. I'm Baz Donoghue. So I'm a technical solutions consultant here at Somerford Associates. From a background perspective, I spent 12 years in the Royal Air Force, so working in the UK military, and therefore after then joined Somerford and have been working here for a number of years. The latter half of my experience with regard to the military was in cyber defense. So one of the things that I got to grips with quite early on as part of that tenure was getting access to various different capabilities, whether or not they were on premise or in the cloud, and essentially trying to understand and integrate them into our current capabilities and ways of working. So I've got a lot of exposure to various different technologies, and this has kind of helped understand the landscape as it is at the moment. So what we're going to be delivering today is a webinar that talks around cloud security strategy, but again focuses on how to get the most out of the various different tools that you may not have available to you when it comes to carrying out various different security capabilities on the cloud. I'm joined today, hopefully, by Grace Mayer, who is our head of support and sales engineers. If you're here, Grace, could you like to give an introduction?
Yes, thank you so much, Baz, and sincere apologies if you do hear any banging knocks, saws, whatever it may be. We do have some work going on, so really sorry if there's any background noise. As I said, I'm head of support and sales engineers over here at Somerton Associates, and I've been working with Splunk for around about 6 years and Okta for just nearly 3.
Fantastic. Okay, let us continue. So, what to expect from today's webinar. So again, we're going to have a little bit of a conversation around who we are and what we do that will build up into a cloud strategy that we've kind of developed. Again, some suggestions as to a strategy that can best be followed in order to ultimately gain the most out of the capabilities that you have available to you. And we call those the 3 V's, and we'll talk about those. And once we've discussed those, we're going to have a look at an overview of the technologies that we'd like to talk around from an integrations perspective. So predominantly around Splunk, Okta, Netskope, Terraform, as well as how to take advantage of those on IaaS platforms such as AWS. We're going to have a little conversation around demystifying the technologies. And in order to do that, we always find it's best to just give some practical examples. So we're going to give some step-by-step practical examples of how the technologies can be leveraged and integrate to each become more than the sum of their parts, essentially. And then we'll finish it off with a summary and any questions if there are any. So who are Somerford Associates? And for this one, I'll hand over to Grace.
Thanks so much, Baz. So Somerford Associates are a elite partner of a lot of different technologies, and we really focus on kind of our people and our customers, and realistically our solutions as well. And Baz, I think if you hop over to the next slide. There we go. Now, here at Somerford, we're really focused in having the best trained and certified engineers, project managers, and support staff. And we really focus on really giving a value add to our customers. We have a lot of customers in the FTSE 100 and 250 brackets, and that we've been working with for a very, very long time, talking, 10 plus years. To keep clients like that happy, you always have to have, the very best in whatever it is, whether that's enablement workshops and training sessions, whether it's our project management, or even our dedicated in-house support desk, which I am biased, but we do resolve over 95% of support calls internally without needing to escalate to our vendors. This obviously means that our customers get a much faster turnaround, and it also means that we're always constantly, catching up with you guys and understanding what you're doing. So if we can help in any other ways, or if there's any other kind of issues that you might run into, we can make you aware and obviously help you through those. We always make sure all of our implementation consultants, like Baz, are certified and trained up to date with the highest level of certification they can. And as you'll be aware, and you'll hear across this webinar and others today, that people like Baz are like little wizards in terms of their technical knowledge. Now, we also have government security cleared staff as well. So if you are part of any kind of business or organisation that does require that level of security clearance, we have SC and DV cleared staff as well. And of course, to keep our relationship going, all of our customers get annual health checks to maximize, sorry if I cut my teeth in, maximize your return on your investment, and also highlight any other areas that you can move into or ways that you can use the tool, without having to potentially spend more money.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Grace. And it's because of this relationship and this methodology and this ethos that we have regarding our customers that gives us the ability to be able to have quite frank conversations with them around about cloud security strategy, utilization of their tools, where their challenges are, and ultimately that has led us to be able to start to build out this strategy. So from a Somerford Associates perspective, we are continually analyzing and developing our cloud security strategy so that we can provide our customers with up to date and as current information as possible when it comes to how to best leverage these capabilities. And part of doing that, we've developed what we call the 3Vs from a cloud strategy perspective. So again, these are technology agnostic and is more of a kind of guideline or approach that can be leveraged to help best understand where there might be gaps in your current cloud security strategy, or where there might be some opportunities for a symbiotic relationship between various different capabilities. So the 3Vs here are vision, visibility, and value. So we're going to quickly have a look at what each of these actually means, and then we'll start to have a look at the technologies, and then we'll look at step-by-step examples of how we leverage those technologies and where they kind of play a part within this cloud security strategy. So the first V, as we mentioned there, is vision. So essentially vision is having a step back and having a look at your current security strategy, and essentially exploring, as it says, the benefits of rationalizing, but ultimately and most importantly is articulating what the cloud strategy means for a particular organization. Now, many organizations already have very firm cloud security strategies in place. And ultimately, this step is just having a look at what that vision currently is and how well, as an organization, you believe you're currently meeting that vision. And also, as well as kind of, we talked about demystifying, it's also really valuable to try and demystify actually what it is that the technologies available are actually providing to you from a strategic position. So if we were to have a look at that from a question and answer form, so the question here is, okay, well, if we're having a look at our cloud security strategy, what is the focus of our cloud security strategy? Are there various different focal points that we need to have considerations for? Is there any that are more important than the other? And this kind of, when you kind of think about it more in a straightforward manner, essentially, the way I like to think of it is what are the cloud security crocodiles nearest to the canoe? Which are our biggest concerns? So where are our biggest risks? Where is our current biggest threat? And how well have we got some security controls in place to mitigate that threat? So an answer to that in particular might be, okay, well, if we have a look at our current cloud security strategy, maybe for us as an organization, managing data loss prevention governance on cloud technologies is huge for us. So as an organization, maybe we have lots of various different data stored in multiple different areas. This could be on premise, it could be in various different IaaS solutions, so it could be in our cloud storage, it could be in cloud storage applications, so some software as a service applications as well. And these days with cloud security, there is an absolute explosion, certainly increased and accelerated by COVID-19, of data explosively being placed across the internet and having a really wide spread as to where these are being placed. So again, if we have a look at what does this actually mean, well, how do we ensure that the data, our data in particular, doesn't end up where we don't want it to? And more importantly, or as importantly, depending on how you look at it, is how do we prove this? So how do we prove our security controls are in place? And this is an example of having a rationalization and analyzing our current strategy in order to better understand what it is from a security control perspective we need to do. And what this will help us do is to take our strategy at the strategic level and help to translate that down to the tactical level. So when it actually comes to configuring, controlling, and understanding what the capabilities are that are moving towards us being able to achieve our strategy. This leads us on nicely into visibility. So now that we've kind of rationalized our strategy, we then need to understand what the required level of visibility from our platforms and products we need in order to realize that strategy. So again, if we have a look at question form, how do we develop and maintain security controls on public cloud infrastructure? So it's a pretty straightforward question, but again, if we were going to translate that, we need to translate that to what that means within our organization security strategy. So, for example, it could be that we need to be able to secure dynamic operations, and maybe there's some development environments, and are we creating secure products and deliverables? So essentially, this question is looking at DevOps. So we're having a look at DevOps here, and we're kind of rationalizing out, well, what is it from a DevOps perspective that we're actually carrying out? If we were to delve into kind of DevOps, which I think is a completely separate webinar, I could talk for hours on as well, but we need to understand from a DevOps perspective, where is it our organization falls? So for example, in a typical DevOps environment, as I would expect it, our organization would be creating some tangible output, some tangible product that is being provided to customers. Whether or not this is a application, whether or not this is a platform or capability, or whether or not this is something else that's provided internally to within our organization, being able to understand what it is that we're developing and where we are in that DevOps journey is really, really important. There's discussions around DevSecOps, where we're carrying out security operations and adding additional security controls after we've developed a product. There's arguments for SecDevOps, where we're doing it in step with the development. But there's also something that's sometimes missed, and that's securing a development environment. So we have many customers who they don't necessarily produce products or deliverables that are then sold or presented or provided to customers, but they do lots of development in order to boost their own capabilities internally within the organization. And there is still development platforms, and these development platforms are still particularly vulnerable to threats because of what they offer. An answer to that, then, if we're having a look and say, okay, well, we understand now. We understand that actually, from our organization perspective, we're going to say that we want to do securing of our DevOps environment. So we want to secure our own internal IT capabilities. Well, in that perspective, then Elastic PAM, for example, might be something that we're extremely interested in. So Elastic PAM, again, something that has been around for a little while, but is becoming more and more prevalent, is again, essentially, how can we ensure that we apply our privileged access controls, especially within dev environments, which typically tend to hold quite a few secrets. They tend to be in development, so they might not necessarily have as robust security controls as a full production environment. How can we ensure that our privileged access controls will scale with that dynamic infrastructure? So lots of cloud IaaS platforms, whether or not we're using containerization or if we're using elastic compute, will scale up and scale down dependent on the requirements of the platform. And what we need to be able to do is ensure that our privileged access capabilities scale with them. So this typically, I say historically, but typically it is and used to be carried out by things such as Bastion hosts. However, with AWS, again, specifically, it's not recommended that we utilize a Bastion host for this capability anymore. And this is where things like Elastic PAM are becoming much more prevalent. Also, there's a question towards the end there, which is around working with developers or against them. So again, this is more important because yes, we want to apply as many security controls as necessary against our development environments, but we also don't want to stifle the creativity and productivity of our development staff. So we need to look at tools that are going to be able to not just ensure that any security controls are not what would be considered a bump in the road or some form of hurdle for our developers, but actually to make their lives that much easier, to be able to have security controls where they say, actually, yes, that makes sense. This makes my development on the environment actually that much quicker. And then once we've brought them on board and we have their buy-in, then it becomes all that much easier to be able to apply those security controls and maintain them. And then finally, we have a look at value. So the final V is value. And again, once we've clarified our vision, we now understand what our visibility needs to be to achieve our vision, then we can start to have a look at value. And essentially, value is, again, being able to appreciate what capabilities we already have in place from a cloud security perspective or from a security perspective in general, and not necessarily just from a security perspective, from an IT ops perspective, from a DevOps perspective. We can understand what tools we currently have available to us, what platforms and capabilities, and because we've rationalized our vision and we've discussed our visibility, we should be able to identify where there are potentially gaps, and also where there's some crossover, but also where there is opportunities for cumulative capability, i.e. for capabilities to come together to create a kind of symbiotic relationship which enhances the overall security controls and stance of the organization. If we have to look at, again, when we're having a question of our value, so again, we understand the focus of our cloud security strategy. Well, can we achieve what our focus is today? And if not, then why? So how do we prove that we're meeting all of our security strategy requirements? From an auditing capability, how can we actually prove that our security controls are effective? Is there a way that we can articulate their efficacy throughout the organization and ensure that the various different stakeholders are content and happy and essentially can sleep at night knowing that everything that we can do, we are doing? So in answer to that, again, what is all around understanding the cloud capabilities to leverage those cumulative gains. So again, we talked about where the gaps are. Do we have gaps in our current cloud security capabilities? And this doesn't necessarily need to be gapped by a new product. It doesn't necessarily need to be an entirely new purchase for us to be able to cover those gaps. It might be that we're utilizing a tool elsewhere in the organization that fits that gap nicely. It just might not be being used in a cumulative way and may well be siloed within another part of the organization. So again, helping to unlock the potential and ultimately sweat the value of that asset. Okay, so let's have a quick look at some of the technologies that we're going to have a look at. So we're going to give you a bit of a quick overview on each of these. We'll talk through Splunk, Netskope, and Terraform. First up, we'll have Grace discuss Okta, as I'm familiar with Okta, but I'm certainly nowhere near Grace's level when it comes to understanding at the technical level, so she's going to explain that for us. Grace.
Baz, I was just going to say, you're too kind. So, as Baz said, Okta is an identity platform, and kind of on the contrary to most, it is a cloud-first identity platform. It was born and built in the cloud and will always continue to be kind of cloud-first. Now, Okta really focuses around creating value for IT by creating more productive workforces, by really reducing your IT spend on licensing, administration costs, and also saving your administrators time and giving them enhanced security without having to reinvent the wheel or spend hours and hours kind of doing different policies in 5 different platforms and making sure that they're all the same. We also create value for developers by allowing them to actually focus on what they want to do at the end of the day, which is build their web, SaaS, and mobile apps, and just be able to put authentication in via an SDK and make it really, really easy for them to just focus on what they want to do and then, not necessarily become security engineers off the back of it. Now, you might be thinking, okay, how do we do this? So it's in a few different ways. And Okta is a modular platform, so you only have to go with what you're interested in. Now, everything is based around our single sign-on and our universal directory. Now, single sign-on at SSO might not be nothing new to people on this call, but the way that we do it with our universal directory is slightly different to pretty much any other vendor out there. What we do with our universal directory is we pull in the Active Directory credentials, we pull in their LDAP credentials, maybe if we're using Azure AD, we pull them in as well. And then we also pull in all of their accounts from their downstream applications, whether that's Office 365, Workday, Zendesk, whatever it might be. Now, within this particular universal directory, we create one individual profile for that user with all of their different accounts underneath. It makes it much easier for administration being able to see what people have access to, but it also makes it much easier to actually understand what policies you should make, based on what access people need to have for their day to day. Now, the Universal Directory allows us to do something really cool, which is lifecycle management. Now, when we talk about movers, shakers, and levers, I like to call them, or joiners, shakers, and levers, we often refer to it as, maybe using a couple of different automation tools to do it, or maybe having scripting or ADFS kind of backing us up and doing that kind of deletion of accounts for us. Now, the problem is that normally some rogue accounts are left, and often you don't necessarily know which accounts haven't been deprovisioned, and admins are busy enough, they often don't have time to go through and check all of the different accounts that are there in your business and whether or not they should be there or not. Now, with Okta's lifecycle management, we can automatically create accounts for you in not only Active Directory or Okta, but also all of those downstream applications as well. Now, we can also provide license-based permissions. So in things like Office 365, where different licenses will give you different access to their portals or different products that they have available, we're able to basically say this user is part of this group and that group gets these licenses. So when you create that user in either Okta or Active Directory, depending on where you'd like your master to be, that will automatically create that account in Okta, AD, and all of those downstream accounts and make sure they've got the correct licenses. Now, so that you're not wasting these licenses, which is a real kind of cost burden to many businesses, we actually go ahead and do this thing called just-in-time provisioning, or JIT. Now, what JIT allows us to do is, rather than actually have that account active and live and using that license from, say, 30 days before the person's going to arrive, they actually only get that account activated at the point of trying to sign in. So this means that you can save a lot of money, and we actually have one customer in particular who saved £100,000 in a year by using Okta for their lifecycle management, just from Office 365 and Workday licensing alone, which is astronomical. Now, we don't just do sign-ons and kind of authentication into different applications. We can also do it for server-based authentication. So if you've got any servers that you need access to, APIs, and even if you've got any web apps that you guys host on premise that you want to secure the access to, we can, of course, cover those off as well. We can even replace a web access firewall that you might have running with something called Okta Access Gateway. I could remember the letters then and not what the A stood for. And our OAG agent is really new, but if you haven't already taken a look at it, I definitely recommend having a look at it, because it provides you so much more granular control about the policies that you want to apply, whether those are from AD, Okta, or something like Netskope. Finally, before I bore you all to death about Okta, our adaptive MFA really allows you to create options that suit your workforce at home, remote working, or in the office, or if they're across different devices. I'm somebody who loves to work from my phone or from any mobile devices. My phone is my world. I am glued to it. I will hold my hands up. Now, by using Okta, I'm able to get secure access into containerized applications that the business are running without having to actually download the application to my phone and have potential security problems about, if I don't have a good PIN or password on my phone or something like that. We can also do adaptive multi-factor using soft tokens for your applications or for signing into desktops or your servers or your applications using text message. We can use Google Authenticator, or Okta have their own app, Okta Verify, which, if you do have a phone with biometrics, can also use that as well. So again, much better enhanced security.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Grace. Onto our next technology. So Splunk. So again, I'm sure many of you have likely heard of Splunk. Again, I won't go into any particularly great detail. It'd be good to dive in and start to have a look at the use cases. But essentially, Splunk is a data from anywhere platform. And again, they've relatively recently, I say recently, was some while ago now, from their cloud perspective, from a Splunk cloud perspective, they're adding in functionality more and more and more, and one of which is essentially going to be what Splunk have deemed their security operations suite. So this is taking a lot of their premium applications and products and bundling them together into a kind of single pane view, so that we can have all of our information, all of our capabilities available to us in one place. So Splunk over the years has always been about essentially getting any human readable data and making it searchable for you. And this includes anything that's on premise as well as cloud. But also what we're seeing more and more from a cloud security perspective is that, well, threats in the cloud will require in-cloud security solutions. And essentially these solutions are, they're born in the cloud. They're typically thrive and are best of breed in the cloud. And essentially what they do is whatever the particular capability is designed to do, they're fantastic at it. So what we want them to do is to have those cloud applications do what they do, and then provide information about what they've done into Splunk. Before kind of the advent of IaaS and before IaaS started getting really widespread as a capability and being utilized by a multitude of organizations, especially now as mentioned during COVID-19, we again would typically look from not just from a Splunk perspective, but from a log analysis or a SIEM solution, look to ingest all of the kind of real in the weeds, really verbose events that we could, and then start to build logic out on Splunk. Now, we can absolutely still build logic out on Splunk for those types of capability, but actually, if we have capabilities in the cloud, so we have a next generation secure web gateway, maybe we have some zero access capabilities, essentially we can get a lot more value from logging what those capabilities are doing, as opposed to maybe trying to take everything at that granular level and trying to write rules on top. And what this does is helps us clear up the view, helps give us that additional visibility, but doesn't necessarily need to bog us down with various different events that we may need to then add significant levels more of normalization on top of to truly understand. So we get the tools to do what they're best at, get them to do the work, and we pull them together in a single pane of glass view from within, in this instance, Splunk. Netskope being one of those tools, again, hosts to various different microservices, and Netskope really is a cloud suite of tools, again, very modular, that we can leverage to cover off various different cloud security use cases. Everything from the next generation secure web gateway, all the way through from CASB, public cloud security, private access, and beyond. And again, as I mentioned, it does this through a series of various different security microservices, which again could be configured in a modular way in order to give us exactly the fine tuning from a security control perspective that we need. And we're going to utilize, again, Netskope in an example shortly. And then finally, the HashiCorp stack, or the Hashi stack, as we like to call it. Again, it's an open source infrastructure. A lot of the time it's infrastructure as code software tools, but in fact they've expanded quite a bit beyond that now, and again essentially builds up and resides in various different elements, in particular these kind of four main areas within kind of cloud computing. So everything from down at the bottom to infrastructure, all the way through up from security perspective by leveraging something like Vault. Then when we get into the networking side of life, we're starting to look at interactions between different services. And again, when we either have a hybrid cloud security strategy, where we maybe have some on-prem services as well as some in-cloud services and SaaS applications, or even if we're entirely in the cloud, so we're cloud native now. Again, we have to kind of shift our thinking a little bit with regards to how we can identify various different services and endpoints. When we were on premise, when static infrastructure, then IP addressing, static IP addressing was kind of fine. It was enough to infer trust. But when we make that step across, whether or not that's with one foot and we're in a hybrid, or we've taken both feet and taken a running jump into the cloud and now we're in there, again, we have to be able to infer trust and identity in a different way, and we do that typically through, again, identity and Console's capability that allows us to do that. as well as carrying out some capabilities at runtime with Nomad. In our example, we're going to have a look at Terraform. So again, hopefully that's something that's familiar with you. Again, it's an infrastructure as code software tool that helps us build up our infrastructure. Again, typically within IaaS platforms, to be able to quickly build environments, and not just build, but to build, maintain, alter, and then destroy as well. Destroy is also a part that needs to be covered off. And it does this through codifying essentially various different cloud APIs into multiple different forms of declarative configuration files. So let's jump into a challenge and have a look at what this means practically. So the first challenge that we want to have a look at now is around unmanaged devices. So essentially, as I mentioned, lots of organizations, especially with the quarantines being engaged, and significantly large amounts of people working from home now, they've had to adopt whatever strategy that they can in order to maintain business operations and to maintain relevancy as well. In order to do that, many of these organizations have had to take a kind of running jump into the cloud, as we talked about. And in order to fulfill their requirements, many organizations are leveraging unmanaged devices, or sometimes called as bring your own devices, to enable their end users to access various different services from that organization. So whether or not that would be accessing their data platform, or their suite of tools, whether or not, again, that could be various different AWS products, it could be various different products across the suite that Microsoft offer, and GCP, Google as well. More and more users are being able to access these capabilities from their own devices. Now, whilst this is very convenient, it also presents us several risks. So in this particular challenge, we're going to have our organization, they can leverage unmanaged devices. And one of the problems that we have is users can now download data from our sanctioned cloud applications to their personal devices. And as I'm sure many of you know, once that happens, we've lost control of that file. We've lost control of that data. If we were to look at it from a DLP perspective, if we were to look at it from a risk perspective and a malware perspective, again, we have no additional security controls on that unmanaged device to be able to protect that device against malicious software, and various different aggressors and attackers can leverage that, again, hand in hand with the capability for our users to potentially download sanctioned data, sanctioned DLP information onto their personal devices, and then they can leverage that the lack in security controls to further pull that off and gain additional information around the organization. So again, we have a look at this example here from a web perspective, the capability to be able to download some financial operational data here, which is attached to an email, or even to be able to save it to a personal OneDrive, which is another scenario that we need to consider. So the solution here, again, is in this instance is to couple an IAM solution with a CASB solution. So again, from our perspective, we're looking at Okta and Netskope, but with this enables us to give us some granular control about what data and information and files can be downloaded to particular devices. So for example, if our users are leveraging a fully managed device, then we can allow them to carry out uploads and downloads to that device, potentially safe in the knowledge that we're also leveraging various different security controls on our managed device. So we'd like to think that we've got a nice EDR, so endpoint detect and resolve solution on there. We'd also like to think that we've got various different antivirus softwares on there or anti-malware softwares on there. And as well as that, we're also going to leverage Okta for a single sign-on capability. And once we've ascertained identity using our IAM solution, we can then granularly apply security controls against each of our sanctioned cloud applications to determine what can be downloaded, but also more importantly, what can be uploaded, to ensure that various different types of file or various different information isn't uploaded to unsanctioned cloud applications when it shouldn't be. Now, if we're thinking about unmanaged devices, so if someone's going to leverage an unmanaged device, then again, we may want to have a look at uploads and downloads in a slightly different way. So we might actually want to say, well, we don't want anybody to be able to download anything from our sanctioned cloud applications to their personal devices, because once we've lost visibility of that file, once we've lost visibility of that data, then it's game over, essentially. There's nothing more that we can do with regards to that file. So we might want to block downloads entirely, but we also don't want to stop productivity. So what we might want to do is allow our end users to be able to upload files to our sanctioned cloud applications, but we might want to carry out malware scanning of them. We're less worried in this instance, although we potentially could be, but we're less worried in this instance about DLP, because again, hopefully the end user's device shouldn't have any of our particularly sensitive DLP files on them, but we are particularly concerned about an unmanaged device, which it poses a higher threat from a malware perspective, uploading some unwanted malware into our sanctioned cloud applications, which could then potentially be downloaded by other, well, if we've got our security controls in place, they shouldn't be downloaded by any other unmanaged devices, but they could well be downloaded by our sanctioned devices if we don't, or our managed devices if we don't have the requisite security controls in place. And then again, finally, we might have to have a look at mobile devices as well, whether or not that might be tablets or mobile phones. And again, we might want to have a slightly more tuned, a little bit, a slightly altered skew and view of how we manage those uploads. And again, we might want to allow downloads provided that the right types of circumstances are met. We may want to limit the cloud applications or even types of file or even the contents of which can be downloaded. And we can do that really granularly down to phrases, down to dictionary words, to ensure that on mobile devices, only certain types of files can be downloaded. And that helps maintain security, but also helps continue productivity. Let's have a little technology integration example of that now. So for example, in this example, we'll have a look at sanctioned cloud applications, sanctioned cloud storage access via personal devices. So exactly the scenario we just discussed. So we have our user here. They're using an unmanaged device, so a personal device, and they're going to access our sanctioned OneDrive for Business application in order to download some files so that they can continue to do their work at home. Now, as soon as they access our particular sanctioned OneDrive for Business and they add in their credentials, they will immediately be redirected to our IAM solution, which will be Okta. Now, Okta will not only allow this user to authenticate, but it will provide additional security controls around single sign-on. So we know that actually when the user logs on, they're only going to have to sign on once, and they'll be given access to all of the tools and products and applications and capabilities that they need to have access to. But we can also apply additional security controls such as adaptive multi-factor authentication to ensure that we really guarantee that individual's identity as far as we can. But it's also going to allow us to carry out auditing of that authentication as well, which is extremely important. Once the user's authenticated, again in this scenario, we still want them to be able to go to OneDrive for Business to carry out what it is that they need to do for their daily tasks. However, we're going to use something such as a proxy or potentially a reverse proxy as required through something like Netskope's CASB capability to then give them access to the platform as they need it, in this instance, OneDrive for Business. And what this is going to enable us to do is to then have real-time auditing of all of that user's activity against that particular cloud application. Now, some organizations will capture elements of this communication through secure web gateways. The issue with secure web gateways, dependent on their capability, is that for much of the time is they'll be able to tell you when a user has accessed a particular cloud application. So it could be OneDrive for Business, it could be Google Drive, it could be S3 storage, for example, via AWS console. However, they typically don't. They're unable to encode. They're unable to encode the information that's in that URI, and so they'll just be able to tell you that a user went to a particular cloud application and maybe some information around the source device within which they accessed it. They typically don't tell you which instance of OneDrive they visited, whether or not it was your corporate instance, whether or not it was their personal instance, whether or not it was potentially a third party's instance, be they a partner or potentially an aggressor that has provided a link to a legitimate cloud storage application with a view to surreptitiously get one of our users to download something by it looking on a legitimate, trustworthy cloud application. However, with many next generation secure web gateways or CASB solutions, they will give us the whole gamut of information around what that particular user accessed, and not just which instance they accessed, but what they did when they were there, which files they interacted with, how did they interact with the files? Was it an upload? Was it a download? Was it an online edit? Where else did they go? And this gives us the full security and knowledge of knowing that we're auditing that activity against our cloud application service. Now, again, in this instance, this has all happened seamlessly to the user. They've attempted to access OneDrive, they've been redirected, they've authenticated, and now they're continuing with their daily tasks. Unbeknownst to them now, this could trigger off a series of different events. So we're going to log all of this information. So we're going to log it within Netskope. And what we want to do is provide those events to our log analysis platform, be that or even our CM solution in most instances. So we're going to log that against our CM solution. And again, within our CM solution, we're likely going to have some various types of correlation rule or some form of alerting that will let us understand what is occurring when we need to understand when it's occurring. And in this instance, we've got users who've authenticated, they've attempted to access directly, and now they've authenticated. But this is telling us that they've accessed it via their personal devices. And this is something that we might very well be extremely interested in. Not only that they've authenticated, but again, if we look at the original scenario, it's that they're explicitly going on to download something. So again, depending on how our security controls are configured, they may well be able to download something from our sanctioned cloud storage device, from our sanctioned cloud storage application to their personal device. They may not, but either way, we'd like to be informed of that activity. And once that hits this kind of log analysis platform within our CM solution, we can then make some decisions. So these decisions, again, we might want to choose one, we may want to choose both. First off, we're going to want to alert. So we might want to use something like Splunk on Call. And Splunk on Call can then make sure that a member of our security team can be made aware of any of that activity, which could well be suspicious, and enable them to then carry out some additional analysis, or essentially to keep an eye on exactly what's happening with regards to that user. And again, if we wanted to take that one step further, we might not just want to alert and make aware, but we might also wish to automate. So again, this is where we might use something that's again part of Security Operations Suite within Phantom, which is a SOAR product. So a security orchestration and automated response. And what we might want to do there is automate our response to say, actually, okay, well, now that we know they've actioned our OneDrive for Business, and we recognize that they're actioning it from a personal device, we may well want to disable their access to OneDrive for Business. So again, we can do that in a very granular way by passing that through to Okta. And what we may want to do is disable them from either a single cloud application, so just OneDrive. Maybe we want to disable them from accessing all of our SaaS cloud storage applications and allow them access to the other SaaS applications we have available, or maybe we want to block access to everything. So again, we can make those granular decisions based not just on this particular scenario, but various different other activities that are occurring within our CM solution. They can all build up a picture and we can respond based on that. And then finally, educate. So we're going to want to contact the user and to educate them as to why they understand what it is that they were trying to carry out. Were they trying to download something that they shouldn't have been downloading? Was there a legitimate reason? In the future, how often will they have to do this again? Are we going to have to, again, take that into some considerations with a view from our security strategy, that this is something that our users need to do in order to be productive. So again, we can educate the user, and we can also educate ourselves as to the reasoning behind it, which will ultimately come back in and from the tactical back up to the strategic level, help to feed in to our vision. Okay, let's have another quick look at another problem. So this problem is cloud DevOps. So again, we discussed the various different terminology from a DevOps perspective, whether or not you're in DevSecOps or you're in the SecDevOps camp. But again, in this instance, I like to think of it of securing DevOps, which is something that we work with on quite a few of our customers. So our customers are building up various different capabilities within their organization in cloud-based applications, again, typically within IaaS and various different compute elements in there. but also within containerization. And the problem here is that cloud, again, by its very nature, as it says there, is transient. It grows, it can grow and shrink explosively. It's ephemeral, so we don't always have access to various different resources that were there previously, and things are assigned in a very roundabout way. In fact, that when something is assigned an identity or potentially an IP address or even a set of security tools, or tokens or controls, they can be rescinded and removed very easily. And the same goes for various different secrets as well. And again, they're elastic, so we expect them to be able to grow, and we must be able to keep up with that growth. So again, that translates to essentially this attack surface, which is just constantly, as it says there, in a state of flux. So within minutes, it could be extremely small, and again, it could grow to huge amounts, it could go to a huge footprint. But the problem is that when it expands, then that particular footprint isn't necessarily focused in one particular area. So we might have a small increase in the number of EC2 instances, for example. So we might have a relatively small explosion, as it were, in EC2 instance requirements, but then we may need to stand up significantly more S3, dependent on what we're doing. Again, from a web perspective, maybe web front end is being built in, a load balancer perspective is quite elastic, but it doesn't necessarily translate to the rest of the environment. It all depends how we've configured it and what the purpose is. And again, because we're talking about development environments as opposed to production environments, these instances typically still do use some form of shared or default admin credentials, so not necessarily on the management plane. So when we're talking about securing DevOps environments, often customers will say, okay, well, we've completely secured access from an AWS perspective. We've secured access to the AWS console. We're leveraging an IAM solution. We've got various different IAM groups and controls in place. But securing access to AWS console doesn't necessarily mean that you've secured access to the compute instances. So you might not have secured access to the EC2 instances. You might not necessarily have controlled access to your VPC, and you might very well, again, not have controlled access to S3. And in a DevOps environment, again, where things tend to happen very quickly, things tend to be developed at pace, often various different developers, I know haven't been one, the things can be spun up with default credentials before we then need to alter those credentials. And if we take that kind of methodology and combine it with the elasticity of cloud, then it becomes essentially a growing mass of holes, essentially. So let's have a look at a solution for that. So again, a potential solution here is to leverage Terraform, as we mentioned. So our infrastructure is code. And this time we're also going to leverage something from Okta called Advanced Server Access. We're going to couple that with some CCNA from a Netskope, which I'll cover off. But essentially what this will allow us to do is when we want to build our instances, our cloud instances, we're going to use our infrastructure as code. So we're going to build up our Terraform configurations. And these Terraform configurations, again, will be used to help scale our cloud instances. At the same time as doing so, we can also create what's called an ASA project, which will help us assign groups and then generate enrollment tokens for the various different developers and other guests that might well need to access those end devices, so those compute instances. And what can happen here is that then as these environments grow, as they build out elastically, our security controls build with them, and it then becomes extremely easier for us to be able to then apply access for various different identities to various different elastic environments now, without necessarily having to go on and having to manage each one individually. So as our threat landscape expands, then our security controls expand and also contract to meet with it. So expansion is one major element of it, but also we want them to be able to contract as well. So we don't want any extant security controls, any extant secrets or accesses once instances have been destroyed. And what we then want to do once we've configured that as a security control is that we might want to apply something from Netskope's perspective is public cloud auditing. So our public cloud security capability to then run over our cloud instances and make sure that our security controls are being honored. So again, from a Netskope cloud security perspective, this is going to tell us all about the various different rules that we're compliant with. So in this instance, it might be best practices from an AWS perspective, it might be best practices from GCP, it could be NIST framework, it could be various different other frameworks that are available, or it could be custom organizational frameworks that we need to maintain compliance against. It can build us up a list of available resources. It can tell us the various different states of those. And what we should be able to do is utilize this capability to audit our security controls that we placed previously to ensure that there shouldn't be any gaps in our security capability. And if there is, then we can identify them early. We can place those back into the DevOps environment cycle. We can make sure that then our Terraform configurations are configured, that our Okta ASA is configured to be able to account for those, and we can understand how best to start to then cover off these gaps in our security capability. So the solution ultimately then is, in this instance, if we integrate our IAM platform elastically across the cloud estate, what it then does is our IAM solution and our security controls, they become as agile as our infrastructure is. Again, talked about this already. That's going to help expand our security footprint. And we also want to try and change our methodology and our thought process to be able to ditching these kind of default credentials, even in a development environment, even in a test environment. Try and ditch these, admin password 123 type capabilities that are built up and used just for ease of use, and actually start to embrace identity, whereby we don't need to have to rely upon these kind of default anybody know credentials. Your identity is enough to give you access to what you need to get access to. And again, helping secure the secrets around what you need access to is something that we should be looking at as well from a secret management perspective. And what this enables as well, funnily enough, is when we have a look at that, is rather than being hurdles that devs need to get over or blockers that kind of stop their creativity, actually a lot of that problem around access, even around encryption, for example, if we look at things like encryption as a service, it can be obfuscated away from our developers so they don't have to worry about it. They just log in using IAM, they have access to what they need to have access to, and again, they have the ability to be able to add in the various different development capabilities they need to, as they need to do that also. So rather than trying to play catch up, it's much easier to keep tempo and keep step with the various different attack surfaces that are expanding with our organization. So yes, as we said, ideally it's better to look at what capabilities that you have and see if we can build up this cumulative capability. We see if there is some various different symbiotic relationships that we can have between our capabilities that might well plug some of the gaps that we've seen in our security strategy, or even be able to sweat the assets better so that we can actually get much more value out of them. So again, with regard to these particular technologies, again, they're all class-leading technologies in their own right. And ultimately, we want to get as much value from them as possible. So that, again, help by taking a look at our vision, by understanding our strategy, and then understanding what visibility we need in order to achieve that strategy. That will help us translate the strategy down to the tactical level, whereby then we can start to garner better value from our tools, because we can understand exactly what it is our tools are doing for us, what they're not doing for us, and where those capabilities can be used across the organization. As well as always making sure that we have the capability to not just employ and leverage our security controls, but also to prove that they're working, to audit the fact that our security controls are in place and they're doing what they need to do with this belt and braces assurance. It also allows us to have a look at our integration and interoperability. So again, this is more around people and process. So again, when we've worked with people in the past, often various different organizations utilize tools in subtly different ways, and sometimes again through working cumulatively to understanding that vision, to being able to build up what that visibility should be, that enables organizations to take a look at the people and process and to help to build out processes that support integration of those capabilities together to ultimately garner further value. And as mentioned, that kind of helps us build up these symbiotic relationships, which we've only really ever touched the surface on in a couple of examples that we had a look at. And again, forward thinking again from a cloud security perspective, you probably heard me mention earlier, it's that in-cloud threats require in-cloud solutions. And again, each of these capabilities are essentially born in the cloud. So it's what they've been doing from the get-go, and they really understand that sphere within which they work. This can also then help from an organizational perspective understand what your cloud adoption milestones are going to be. So everybody's different on their cloud journey. There's some organizations who are still pretty much very on-premise, very static infrastructure, but they are likely leveraging some elements of software as a service. There are others who are absolutely racing ahead from a cloud perspective and will be cloud we'll be building everything out in the cloud natively by default, and there'll be various different capabilities in between. So again, understanding this can help you build your milestones to be able to reach your cloud adoption at a achievable pace. And from our perspective, again, apologies if I've kind of said anything that maybe upset you, but our thought process always is potentially disruptive, but always as honest approach as possible. So here's, again, a bit of a snapshot of some of the solutions that we talked about. And again, part of what we call the Somerford Security Solutions ecosystem, whereby, again, in our cloud security strategy, we're really trying to understand what it is these capabilities can truly do, where they best carry out and interact with all of the other suites of technologies, where potentially there's some overlap, again, trying to understand what that overlap is and help guide based on the vision, based on the visibility requirements, which tool may be better within which circumstances, if there is some overlap of capability. And again, just trying to get as much value from these capabilities as possible. So we talked about these ones in particular. Again, HashiCorp Vault and Console I mentioned briefly, but again, part of the Hashi stack. So thank you very much for joining us and for listening. So if there's any questions, feel free to type them into the questions area I think you have access to, so you can type a question in there. You should be able to type something in the chat if you prefer, or if you'd rather have a question, again, please direct it to one of our Somerford email addresses. Grace, is there any particular addresses they should be, it's best to direct email addresses to, questions to?
I think the easiest one would just be info@Somerford Associates. I'll go ahead and pop that in the chat just so that you've got it. That one
Fantastic.
goes to our marketing team and also us as well. So we'll be covering off all bases there.
Perfect. Yeah. So if you'd prefer to have a mull over and ask any questions at a later date, then please do. I'll hang around for a minute or two and keep an eye on the chat and the questions. But if there's nothing else, I hope you have a fantastic rest of your Monday. It's typically very, very, very wet here where I am up in the north of England. So I hope you enjoy the rest of your day wherever you are, and thanks for joining us.